Late in 1876, Gerald Holt sat in the parlor of Colette Ashford's Montana ranch and smiled as if he were offering her a favor. He wanted the East Fork water rights, the water that made her 4,000-acre ranch possible. Colette told him those rights were documented. Holt calmly pointed to the problem, her 1,869 claim, and the county's 1,873 survey did not agree. What he did not know was that Colette and Silas Cain had already found the discrepancy. One boundary marker had been recorded 12 feet south of its original position. That was enough to place the East Fork's primary intake outside Colette's legal boundary. Silas recognized the pattern immediately. Years earlier, paperwork, money, and lawyers had stripped his father of land and water rights in Nebraska. Now Gerald Holt was connected to a St. Louis group using the same method across 3 territories. This was no longer one bad survey. It was a system, and this time, Silas knew exactly what it could take from them. The question was whether they had discovered the trap early enough to stop it. She had scrubbed floors in worse places than this, but she had never scrubbed floors for a woman who was lying to her own future husband. The letter arrived that Tuesday morning, and Colette Ashford read it 3 times before her hands stopped shaking. Arriving Friday. Cannot wait to begin our life together. Bennett. She set the paper down on the mahogany desk, looked up at the grand dining room of the largest ranch house in Silver Creek, Montana, and felt the specific gut-twisting panic of a woman who had built an empire and somehow forgotten to build a home inside it. There were cobwebs in the chandelier. The kitchen smelled of old grease and something dead near the back wall. The guest rooms had not been aired since her mother's visit 2 years ago, and that visit had ended with the old woman standing at the door, looking back one final time, and saying, "Colette, a woman cannot eat money." Then she climbed into the wagon bound for Billings and did not look back again. Colette Ashford was 35 years old. She owned 4,000 acres of Montana grassland, more head of cattle than most men would ever count, a private water source fed by the East Fork of Silver Creek, and a reputation that made other ranchers straighten their spines when she walked into a room. She had inherited the land from her father and built the rest herself, decision by decision, season by season, with a stubbornness the territory respected even when it did not understand. Her house looked like a place where happiness went to die. If you are watching this story unfold, what would you do if the person coming to share your life arrived and found nothing waiting but cold walls and an empty table? Would you tell the truth? Or would you do what Colette Ashford did? Before you find out, if you have not already, please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. You will not want to miss what comes next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now back to Colette Ashford and the man she was about to hire to save her from herself. Colette did not sleep Tuesday night. She walked the house the way a general walks a battlefield the morning after a loss. Slowly, without expression, cataloging every failure. The dining table had a crack running along one end that someone had filled with candle wax and forgotten. 2 of the kitchen chairs were missing rungs. The curtains in the front parlor were so thick with dust that when she pulled one back, the afternoon light hit the room like an accusation. She stood in the middle of the parlor for a long moment, listening to the silence, which was the kind of silence that only gathers in a place where one person has been living alone for far too long. Then she put her hat on and rode to town. Silver Creek in 1876 was the kind of settlement that had just barely decided to become a real town. There was a general store, a livery, a 2-room schoolhouse that was already too small for the children it served, a saloon that also operated as the post office on Wednesdays, and a bulletin board outside Harlan Briggs's feed store where people nailed notices when they needed work done or had work to offer. Colette read the board without stopping her horse, squinting from the saddle. There were 3 notices, one for a missing mule, one advertising a tooth-pulling service from a man traveling through from Helena, and one written in a hand so clean and even it looked almost printed. Experienced cook and housekeeper. Honest work only. References available. Ask for S. Cain at the Mackenzie boarding house. She did not ask herself whether it was a man or a woman. She did not particularly care. She rode to the boarding house, tied her horse, knocked, and waited. The man who answered the door was not what she expected, though she was not sure afterward what she had expected. He was somewhere in his mid-20s, with a kind of face that did not waste much on decoration. Not plain exactly, but purposeful. Dark hair, sleeves already rolled to the elbows, an apron he had not bothered to remove. He looked at her the way men on the frontier learned to look at wealthy women who showed up unannounced, carefully, without warmth, taking inventory. "You Colette Ashford?" he said. She blinked. He had spoken first, which almost never happened when someone met her for the first time. "I am." "You are S. Cain," he said. "What do you need?" She told him. She was more honest than she intended to be, probably because he was already looking at her, like he would see through whatever story she tried to construct. She told him her fiancé was arriving Friday, that her house was in a condition she was not proud of, that she needed someone who could cook, clean, organize, and do it quickly. Silas Cain leaned against the doorframe and looked at her for a moment. "Friday?" he said. "Yes. Today is Tuesday. I am aware." He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "What are you paying?" She named a figure. It was generous, more than generous. He did not react to the number the way most people did. He just nodded once, as if it confirmed something he already suspected about her. "I will be there by 6 tomorrow morning," he said. "Do not touch anything in the kitchen tonight. You will only make it worse." She opened her mouth, closed it. "All right," she said. He closed the door. Colette rode home with the odd sensation that something had just shifted, though she could not say what or why. He arrived at 5:45. She was already up. She had been up since 4, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, watching the dark over the eastern pastures turn gray, and then pink, and then the full golden spread of Montana morning. She heard the wagon before she saw it. A small flatbed with a canvas-covered load in the back and Silas Cain on the seat holding the reins like he had been doing it since he could reach them. He climbed down without waiting for help and stood looking at the front of the house with the same expression he had worn in the boarding house doorway. "How bad is the kitchen?" he said. "I will show you." He followed her in and stood in the kitchen doorway for a count of 5 seconds without speaking. "Right," he said. He went back out to the wagon and began unloading things. A cast iron skillet so well seasoned, it was nearly black. A bundle of dried herbs tied with string. Jars of things she could not identify. A worn leather satchel that turned out to contain cleaning supplies he apparently preferred to whatever she might have had. He did not ask her to help, and he did not make conversation. He rolled his sleeves higher, put on a different apron he produced from the wagon, and went to work. Colette watched for about 10 minutes from the kitchen doorway. "Is there something you would like me to do?" she asked. "Go count cattle," he said without turning around. "Or sign something. Whatever it is you do." She went and found her foreman, Nettie Burrows, out by the barn. Nettie was a lean, weathered woman of 52 who had worked the Ashford Ranch for 11 years and had the unsettling habit of being right about things before anyone else had finished thinking about them. She was a widow, self-made, respected by every hand on the property not because of any authority Colette had given her, but because the authority was simply hers by competence. "Who is the man in the kitchen?" Nettie said. "I hired him to help get the house ready." Nettie's expression did not change. "For Mr. Pierce?" "Yes. So you are fixing the house up for a man you are about to marry," Nettie said, "because you did not think to do it before now." "I have been busy." Colette looked at her. Nettie looked at the barn. They had worked together long enough that neither of them needed to say the rest of it. "He knows what he is doing," Colette said finally. "The Cain man." "I can see that from here," Nettie said. "He has already got something boiling on the stove, and he has only been in there 20 minutes. Colette rode out to the east pasture and spent the morning doing the work she always did, the work that made sense to her, the work where every problem had a solution you could see and measure. A fence was down, or it was not. Cattle were where they should be, or they were not. You found the problems, and you fixed them, and you rode home with dirt on your boots and a soreness in your back that meant the day had amounted to something. When she rode back at noon, the kitchen smelled different. She could not put a finer point on it than that. It just smelled different. There was bread doing something in the oven and a pot of soup on the stove, and Silas Cain had somehow located a bucket of lye she had not known she owned and used it in a way that made it look, for the first time in possibly years, like a floor rather than a record of every boot that had ever crossed it. He brought her lunch without being asked, set a bowl of soup on her desk, a heel of bread beside it, and a cup of coffee that was actually hot. "You do not need to," she started. "Eat while you can," he said. "I need the desk cleared this afternoon. That room needs airing." She ate the soup. It was the best thing she had tasted in longer than she wanted to admit. There was something in it, some combination of things that made it taste like a meal someone had actually thought about rather than simply thrown together to stop a stomach from complaining. When he came back for the bowl, she said, "Where did you learn to cook like that?" He picked up the bowl. Here and there, that is not an answer. He looked at her. No, he agreed, and took the bowl to the kitchen. She sat with that for a moment. Then she got up and cleared the desk. That afternoon, she found herself standing in her own front hallway, and for the first time in years, she actually looked at it. The hat rack Silas had polished and repositioned near the door. The rug he had beaten and relaid so the pattern showed, which turned out to be a pattern she had forgotten was there. A blue and cream weave her mother had chosen when the house was built. She had walked over it every day for 10 years, and somewhere in that decade it had become invisible. She went to the kitchen doorway. Silas was doing something with the pantry shelves. He had emptied them entirely and was wiping each one down and reorganizing the contents in an order that appeared to follow a logic she could not identify. "What is the system?" she asked. "Frequency," he said without turning around. "Things you use daily at eye level. Things you use weekly on the next shelf. Things you use seasonally at the top." She looked at the shelves. It was obvious once he said it. The kind of obvious that only becomes visible after someone who thinks clearly has pointed it out. That evening he cooked supper. Not the kind of supper she had been making for herself for years, which consisted of whatever she could assemble in 10 minutes before falling asleep at the table. He made something with potatoes and beef, and an herb she had never tasted in Montana that turned out to be something he had dried himself and carried in one of the jars from his wagon. The meal was not complicated. It was simply good in the way that things are good when someone who cares about getting them right has gotten them right. She ate at the dining table alone, which was the same thing she had done every night for years, except that Silas was in the kitchen cleaning up, and the lamp was lit, and the table was clean, and the food was warm, and the whole experience of eating alone in her own house felt different in a way she could not have explained to anyone who asked. Wednesday became Thursday in a blur of motion that Colette could not quite keep track of. Silas worked in a way she had rarely seen anyone work. Not frantically, not showing off, but with a consistency that did not require encouragement or supervision. He moved from room to room with the quiet deliberateness of a man who had a picture in his head of what needed to happen and was simply executing it. She found herself following him at odd moments, not to supervise, but because the house felt different in his wake. Warmer, aired out. He opened windows she had not thought to open, and the Montana September came in, not cold yet, still carrying a trace of summer's warmth, and the curtains he had beaten and rehung caught the air and moved, and the rooms felt for the first time inhabited. Thursday morning brought a different lesson entirely. Nettie rode up before breakfast with her mouth set in the particular line that meant trouble with logistics. The north boundary fence was down, a section Colette had specified for repair back in the spring. The posts had rotted through, and sometime, during the night, a portion of the herd had wandered north through the gap and scattered across land that was technically hers, but practically useless for grazing at this time of year. "How many?" Colette said. Nettie dismounted. "Hard to say. 30, maybe 40 head. Tracks go wide once they clear the tree line." The next 2 days cost Colette time she did not have. She rode out with 3 hands and spent hours pushing cattle back through ground that fought every step, and the whole time a phrase kept circling in her mind that she could not quite push away. Nettie had said it that first morning when they stood together at the barn, and she had said it without emphasis, which was how Nettie said the things that mattered most. "You specified maintenance in the spring," Nettie had told her quietly as they saddled up. "You did not follow up." It landed because it was true and because the shape of it was larger than a fence. Colette was good at giving orders. She was good at building systems and structures and the machinery of a successful enterprise. What she was less good at, what she had perhaps never been good at, was the close work, the follow-through. The part where you stayed with something after the decision was made and watched it all the way to completion, rather than turning to the next thing that needed building. She had built a grand ranch house and let the kitchen rot. She had specified a fence repair and never checked whether it happened. She had written letters to Bennett Pierce for 2 years and never once prepared the home he was arriving to share. There was a pattern in that. She did not enjoy seeing it. When she returned to the house Thursday evening, tired and irritated, and carrying the particular frustration of a woman who has spent 2 days fixing something that should not have needed fixing. She found that Silas had finished the guest bedroom in her absence. Fresh curtains hung in the windows. The bed was made with linens she did not recognize, which meant he had either found them somewhere in the house or brought his own. The room smelled of lavender and something clean she could not name. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. Silas appeared behind her, drying his hands on a cloth. He looked at the room, then at her, then back at the room. "You grew up on the frontier?" she asked. "Nebraska mostly," he said. "Sometime in Kansas. Family there?" "A beat. Not anymore." She understood the shape of that answer and did not press it. The frontier had a way of redistributing families. Everyone out here carried a version of that silence. "What brought you to Montana?" "Work," he said. "Before Montana?" "More work." She almost smiled. "Do you give short answers to everyone or just to employers?" He turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it. I give short answers to people who are asking questions because they are nervous about something other than what they are asking," he said. She did not have a response to that. He picked up his cleaning cloth and moved toward the stairs. "The house is looking good," she said, partly because it was true, and partly because she wanted to say something that was not foolish. He paused at the top of the stairs. "It is a good house," he said. "It was just lonely." He was talking about the house. She was fairly sure he was talking about the house. She stood in the freshly aired guest bedroom, with the curtains moving in the September breeze, and told herself he was talking about the house. Bennett Pierce arrived on Friday at 2 in the afternoon. Colette had ridden to meet the stagecoach at the edge of Silver Creek, which was the right thing to do. The thing an honorable woman did when her fiancé was arriving after a long journey from St. Louis. She stood with her hat in her hands and watched the coach come in and felt the compound weight of obligation and expectation, and the particular discomfort of a person who knows she has made promises and intends to keep them. Bennett was handsome. She had known this from the photograph his family had sent with the first letter. He stepped down from the coach and stood in the dust of Silver Creek, Montana, with the composure of a man who had prepared himself carefully for whatever he might find. He was 25 years old, educated, patient, in the way that only genuine character produces, and he smiled at her genuinely and warmly and said, "Colette, you look well." "Bennett," she said. She took his hand. "You have had a long journey." "Remarkably long," he said with a lightness she admired. "But I am here." He was everything she had told herself she wanted when she had written to his family 2 years ago, when the loneliness of the grand ranch house had become something she could not simply outwork. He was gracious, practical about frontier life, in the theoretical way of someone who had read widely about it, and he had waited 2 years with a patience that said something about his character. She helped him into the waiting wagon and drove him to the ranch. He did not speak much on the drive. He looked at the land, the vast stretch of Montana grassland, the mountains showing their first permanent snow at the peaks, the sky that went on in a way that apparently required a moment of adjustment. He was quiet with a thoughtfulness she respected. When the ranch house came into view, he said, "Oh, Colette, it is grand." "It is home," she said, and then caught herself on that word because it felt newly true in a way it had not 3 days ago. Silas had the door open before they reached it. He stood on the porch with the composed attentiveness of a good professional, not servile, not informal, somewhere exactly in the right place between. He had cleaned himself up from the morning's work, and there was something about him standing at the door of the house he had spent 3 days bringing to life that struck Colette in a way she did not examine carefully. Bennett stepped down from the wagon and looked at Silas with a smile that was polite and slightly assessing in the way that intelligent first looks often are. "Mr. Pierce," Silas said, "welcome. I have prepared the guest room, and there is tea ready whenever you would like." "That is very kind," Bennett said. "You must be Mr. Cain." "Just Silas is fine," he said. Bennett glanced at Colette with an expression she could not quite interpret, and then followed Silas inside. The house stopped him in the doorway, not literally. He kept walking, but Colette saw the moment it hit him. The smell of beeswax and herbs, the faint trace of whatever Silas had been cooking. Since morning, the way the light came through the cleaned windows and caught the dust motes that were still settling after 3 days of effort. The dining table polished to a depth that made it look like something treasured rather than merely owned. Bennett stood in the front hallway and looked around with a stillness that told her he was genuinely moved, and something in her chest went complicated. "This is beautiful," he said. He turned to Silas. How long have you worked here? 3 days, Silas said. Bennett looked at him for a moment, then at Colette. 3 days, he repeated. Mr. Cain is very capable, Colette said. There was a pause that stretched just a beat longer than it should have. Then Bennett smiled, and it was a real smile, not a polite one, and said, I can see that. Dinner that night was the most Colette had eaten at her own table in years. Silas made a roasted chicken with vegetables from the kitchen garden he had apparently discovered and pruned in approximately 40 minutes on Wednesday afternoon, and a pie from fruit he had delivered from the general store. The kind of simple, solid meal that made a table feel like a place rather than just furniture. Colette sat at the head of her own dining table and looked at the room as if she had never seen it before. The candles Silas had found somewhere and placed in the holders that had been empty for 3 years. The cloth on the table, pressed and clean, which she was fairly certain was one of the linens her mother had left behind. The way the light fell on the polished wood and turned the room into something that looked not just clean, but cared for. There was a difference between those two things, and she had not understood the difference until now. Bennett ate with the genuine appreciation of someone who had been surviving stagecoach food for 10 seasons. He complimented the chicken twice and the pie 3 times, and ate with the focused attention of a man who understood that good food was not merely fuel, but a form of communication. He asked Silas a series of questions when the man came to clear plates: where he had learned to cook, what his plans were, whether he had been in Silver Creek long. Silas answered the same way he answered everything, briefly, without evasion, but without excess. He had learned to cook from necessity. His plans were his own. He had been passing through. Passing through, Bennett said with the pleasant curiosity of a man who found people interesting. Where are you headed? California, Silas said. Colette's fork paused on its way to her plate. She made it continue. What is in California? Bennett asked. Silas picked up the last plates with the efficiency of long practice. A fresh start, he said, and went to the kitchen. After he was gone, Bennett looked across the table at Colette with an expression that was thoughtful and contained something she did not know how to name. He is remarkable, Bennett said. He is, she said. Bennett looked at his wine glass for a moment. Then he said, Colette, are you happy? The question landed differently than she expected. She looked at her plate. I am glad you are here, she said, which was true, and also not quite an answer. Bennett looked at her for a long moment in the lamplight of the dining room that had been cold 3 days ago. Then he smiled gently and said, I am glad to be here. And he turned the conversation to the ride from town. The days that followed developed a rhythm that Colette could feel pulling at the edges of the life she had planned. Bennett was up early each morning, walking the property with the thoughtful curiosity of a man who genuinely wanted to understand the land he had come to join. He asked good questions. He listened to Nettie's explanations about the cattle rotation and water management with an attentiveness that was not performed. He read in the evenings. He wrote letters to his family. He was in every measurable way exactly the man she had hoped for. And every morning, every single morning, Colette found herself turning toward the kitchen first, not toward the parlor where Bennett sat reading, not toward the study where her own work waited, toward the kitchen, where Silas was doing something that smelled like possibility and sounded like home. The next morning, Bennett tried to make breakfast. It was a generous impulse, and she recognized it for what it was. A man who wanted to prove he could be useful in this house, that he was not merely a guest waiting to be served, that the partnership they had agreed upon in their letters was something he intended to build with his own hands as well as his words. He stood at the stove with flour on his sleeves and a look of concentrated determination, and produced something that was technically food in the sense that it had once been ingredients. The biscuits were dense enough to serve as paperweights. The eggs had taken on a gray quality that suggested they had given up. Silas came into the kitchen, looked at the stove for 3 seconds with an expression that gave away nothing, and began making small corrections without comment. He adjusted the heat. He added water to the biscuit dough that Bennett had already ruined beyond practical rescue, and somehow coaxed it into something that could at least be eaten without injury. He moved around the kitchen with the precise economy of someone who understood every surface and tool in it, and Bennett watched him work. And then Bennett looked at Colette. She did not realize what her face was doing until she saw him see it. It was not admiration, exactly. It was something deeper and harder to name. Recognition. The way you look at someone who is speaking a language you did not know you had been waiting to hear. She felt it happen and could not stop it from happening, and understood in that moment that Bennett had seen it too. The three of them ate breakfast. The conversation was pleasant. Afterward, when Silas had gone to start on the parlor windows, Bennett sat across from Colette at the kitchen table and said, "He is a good cook, he is," she said. "I am not." "Bennett," she started. "It is all right," he said. His voice was calm, his hands folded on the table, his eyes steady. "I am observing." She looked at him and felt something shift in the room, in herself, in the particular quality of the air between them. Not a confrontation, something quieter. A man who had traveled 1,000 miles to start a life with her had just looked at her face while she watched another man fix biscuits, and he had seen everything she was not yet willing to say. He did not push it. He picked up his tea and took it to the parlor and opened a book and read, and the morning continued as if nothing had changed. But something had changed, and they both knew it, and the knowing sat between them like a third person at the table who had not yet been introduced. Sunday brought Derry, a ranch hand of 19, to the kitchen door with a cut above his eye and a swollen left hand he was holding at an angle Colette did not like. Nettie had brought him from the bunkhouse. There was a doctor in Silver Creek, but he was 20 minutes away, and the boy's hand was worrying her more by the minute. Silas came through the kitchen and took one look at Derry's hand. "Sit him at the table," he said. Colette looked at him. "You know about this?" "I know it needs to be looked at before it swells further," he said. "Sit him down." He washed his hands and produced from somewhere a small leather kit worn at the edges and examined Derry's hand with a clinical attention that made the boy go quiet and still, despite himself. He pressed two specific places and watched the boy's face when he did. "Nothing broken," he said. "You will be sore a week. Keep it elevated today." "How do you know?" Derry said. "Because I have seen broken, and this is not it," Silas said, winding a clean cloth around the hand. "You are lucky." "Yes, sir," Derry said, with the chastened tone of someone who has been handled by an expert. After Nettie took him back to the bunkhouse, Colette stood in the kitchen and watched Silas put his kit away. "Where did you learn field medicine?" He did not look up. "Kansas? Kansas?" "There was a lot of it needed in Kansas," he said, and closed the kit. She filed that alongside everything else she had collected about Silas Cain in the last 4 days. He could cook as well as anyone she had ever met. He could read a lame horse from 50 yards. He carried a medical kit and knew how to use it. He had come from Nebraska and Kansas and was headed to California, and everywhere he had been, he had learned what he needed to survive, and none of those places had been his own. Monday morning, she went to the barn early, before anyone else was up, to check on the horse Nettie had mentioned, the one with the bad tendon brought in from the east pasture. She found Silas already there, crouched beside the animal's front left leg, running his hand along the fetlock, with the practiced attention of someone who had done this many times before. "You knew about this horse?" she said. "I saw it yesterday," he said. He did not look up. "Nettie says it is the tendon." "Nettie is right," he said. He stood, brushing straw from his trousers, and looked at her in the early morning Montana light coming in sideways through the barn's slats. His face was unguarded in the way of people who have not yet put their public expression on for the day. "Rest at 2 weeks minimum. 3 if you want to be sure." "You know horses," she said. "I know working animals," he said. "You learn what you use." The sentence stayed in her head long after he said it. Not the words themselves, but the specific flatness of them. Not self-pity, not drama. Just a fact stated without decoration. A life that had taught him things, not because he had sought them out, but because he had needed them to get through. She wanted to ask a question that was not the question she should ask. She knew this the way you know certain roads you should not take. Not because the road looks wrong, but because you can see where it goes. "Where did you work before this?" she said. The safer question. He picked up the small bucket he had brought out, water and something else, some kind of treatment for the horse's leg. "A few places," he said. "None of them mine." He paused at the barn door without turning around. "The horse will be fine," he said. "Rest it, and it will be fine." He walked back to the house. She stood in the barn with the horse and the early morning light and the smell of hay and leather and the specific discomfort of a woman who has just understood something she would very much prefer not to have understood. She was in some kind of trouble. She did not know what kind yet, but it was the sort of thought that, once arrived, did not leave. She stood there for a long time before she followed. By the end of the first week, a pattern had established itself that none of them had planned. and none of them could quite name. Bennett read on the porch in the mornings, while Silas cooked and Colette managed the ranch. The three of them ate together at meals. The conversation was easy in the way that conversation becomes easy when everyone at the table has decided, independently, to be decent about a situation that could very easily become indecent. Bennett asked Colette one evening about the ranch's water supply, not casually, with the specific interest of someone who understood that water on the frontier was not just a resource but political fact. She explained the East Fork, the way her father had claimed it, the way it fed the pastures, and made the whole operation possible. Silas was washing dishes at the sink while she talked, and at one point he turned his head slightly, just slightly, at the mention of water rights, and she noticed it and filed it away without understanding why. That same week, Colette rode the south fence line alone and found a section where the wire had been cut. Not broken. Cut. Clean, deliberate marks. She stood looking at the cut wire for a long time, then rode to find Nettie. Nettie looked at the wire without dismounting. "That is not weather damage," Nettie said. "No," Colette said, "it is not." Nettie looked at the south horizon. "There has been some talk in town," she said, "about the valley parcels. People from outside looking at land." Colette filed that away too. Two things filed away in 1 week. She was beginning to understand that the world around her grand ranch house was more complicated than she had been paying attention to. She had been so focused on building that she had stopped watching. By Tuesday of the second week, the house was fully alive in a way it had never been in the 10 years Colette had owned it. Not the furniture or the cleaned floors or the curtains. Those were real, but they were surfaces. What was alive was something harder to name. There were meals that meant something. There was sound. Bennett had begun humming in the mornings when he read, as if the house had given him permission to make noise in it. There was the smell of things being cooked for the right reasons. Colette sat on the porch after supper on Tuesday evening and listened to the sounds from inside and tried to remember what the house had sounded like a week ago. Nothing. It had sounded like nothing. Her own footsteps and the settling of wood and occasionally the wind. Nettie came around the corner of the house and stopped when she saw her. "Just checking the latch on the south pasture gate," Nettie said. She leaned against the porch post and looked out at the darkening eastern mountains. "Place is different," she said. 3 days of cleaning will do that." Nettie was quiet for a moment. "It is not the cleaning." Colette looked at her. "I have been working this ranch 11 years, Nettie said. She did not look at Colette. "This house has been a fine house. Good structure, good materials. But it has always felt like a place where you stored the woman who owned it between times when she was out working." She paused. "Now it feels like somewhere somebody lives." Colette did not answer. From inside, through the open window, she could hear Bennett saying something, and then a short pause, and then Silas's voice, low and steady, saying something back. "Mr. Pierce is a fine man," Nettie said. "Good quality, yes," Colette said. Another pause. Nettie pushed off the post and settled her hat. "Good night, Colette," she said, and walked off toward the bunkhouse. The gathering at the Briggs place was Marta Briggs' doing, as most social events in Silver Creek were. She had organized it with the efficiency of a woman who understood that frontier communities needed occasions, that people spread across thousands of acres needed reasons to come together and remember they were not alone. It was on a Saturday, the third week of September. Not a formal supper, but a daytime affair. Tables in the yard, food contributed by families from across the territory, two fiddle players from the mining camp south of town. Colette had not intended to bring Silas, but Marta Briggs had included him in the invitation specifically, having heard through the particular channels of frontier gossip that Ashford had hired a remarkable cook, and Marta had decided, in the way that Marta Briggs decided things, that Silas Cain would join them. They arrived in the wagon at mid-morning. Colette and Bennett in the seat, Silas in the back with a pie he had agreed to bring, because the pie was going to be better than anything else on the table, and everyone in the wagon knew it. The gathering was bright and loud and smelled of wood smoke and food. Families Colette had done for years were spread across the Briggs yard in the loose arrangements of people who have earned each other's company through seasons of shared difficulty. There was the Kessler family from the South Valley, whose youngest had been born during the August storms 2 years ago and was now running between tables with the determined instability of a child who had recently discovered legs. There were the Garrett brothers, who ranched a small parcel east of town, and whose mother, Thomason, ran the boarding house with an efficiency that suggested she had missed her calling as a territorial governor. There was Doc Hennessy, the town's doctor, who was already into his second plate and did not appear to be slowing down. For a while, the day was simply what it appeared to be. A community finding itself in the October sun. Women comparing preserves. Men talking about the price of cattle in Helena and whether the railroad spur they had been promised would actually arrive. Children chasing dogs. Dogs chasing children. The whole bright, ordinary noise of people who spend most of their lives a long way apart, coming together and remembering what it sounded like to be many. Silas, without appearing to try, became the most interesting person in the yard within 40 minutes. It was not his looks, though he was put together well enough for the occasion. It was the quality of his attention. He listened to people in a way that made them feel heard, and when he did speak, it was specific and direct, and usually about something practical that turned out to have a dimension no one else had noticed. Old Douglas Haverford, who ran 30,000 head up near the northern foothills and had been complaining about a water rights dispute for 2 years, said something at dinner about the creek diversion his neighbor kept attempting. Silas said, quietly and without preamble, "You documented the original agreement?" Douglas looked at him. "There is an agreement in the county records," Douglas said. "I would get a copy of that before the next dispute," Silas said. "County records have a way of being misfilled when someone with money needs them to be." The table went a little quiet. Douglas looked at Silas for a long moment. Then he looked at Colette. Colette was looking at Silas. Bennett was looking at Colette, looking at Silas. Marta Briggs pulled Colette aside near the back fence while the pie was being served. Marta was a woman who managed information the way other people manage cattle. She gathered it, sorted it, and distributed it at precisely the time it would have the most effect. "That cook of yours," Marta said, "he is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone quieter," Marta said. "He does not talk much, but when he does talk, people lean in." "That is a different thing entirely." Colette watched Silas across the yard. He was crouched down talking to one of the Morrison children, a boy of about 6 who had got something stuck in his boot and was trying not to cry about it. Silas had the boot off and was working the pebble out with the calm efficiency of a man who had handled this particular problem before, possibly many times. And the boy was watching him with the trusting stillness of a child who has decided this person knows what they are doing. "He is good with children," Marta observed. "He is good with most things," Colette said, and heard herself say it, and heard how it sounded, and turned back to the fence. It was around midday when Colette noticed Silas standing at the far end of the food table, talking to a man she did not immediately recognize. Tall, well-dressed by frontier standards, with the posture of someone who had come from money and had not entirely left it behind. The man was leaning toward Silas with visible interest in whatever was being said. Something in Colette's chest went tight. She took 2 steps toward the food table, and then stopped herself because what exactly was she doing and why and to what end? She was an engaged woman. She turned back toward the fence and the conversation about grazing access she had been pretending to follow. She did not look at the food table again for 20 minutes. When she did, the well-dressed man was gone, and Silas was helping Marta's youngest daughter with something related to the pie. And the tightness in her chest eased in a way that she recognized as ridiculous and felt anyway. It was Bennett who found her standing at the fence alone in the early afternoon, after the food had been eaten and the fiddle players had started up again, and people had rearranged themselves in the loose configurations of a gathering that has moved past eating into simply being. He stood beside her and looked out at the mountains, the same direction she was looking. "Who was that man?" she said before she meant to. Bennett glanced at her. "Which man?" "The one talking to Silas earlier, near the food table." A pause. "His name is Gerald Holt," Bennett said. "He is passing through." Something about land in the valley. He mentioned it to Marta. Another pause, and he seemed interested in Silas, Bennett said. "He did," Colette said. Bennett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Colette." She made herself look at him. "Let me say it," he said. "Not sharp, not emotional, just direct." The same directness he had shown the morning he watched her face while Silas fixed the biscuits. "I have been watching for 2 weeks. I have been watching you watch him, and I have been watching myself watch you watch him, which is its own kind of education." She did not say anything. The fiddle had started up something fast, and someone's children were chasing each other around the tables, and the whole scene in front of them was bright and ordinary, and contained nothing of what was actually happening at the fence. "I am not angry," Bennett said. "I want to understand that. I am not performing something. I am genuinely not angry. He paused. I am sad maybe, but sad is honest. Bennett, I made a promise to you, you did, he said. And you meant it when you made it. I believe that. He paused again, and what he said next was the thing she would remember longest from this conversation. The problem with promises is that you have to keep making them every day. The initial making is just the beginning. She looked at the mountains. Montana in late September, the first permanent snow on the peaks, the sky the color of cold water. What are you saying? She said. I am saying, Bennett said carefully, that I came out here because I wanted a life that meant something. A real partnership, not just the arrangement of one. He folded his hands in front of him, and I am saying that a partnership built on someone's sense of duty, rather than their actual heart, is a lonelier arrangement than no arrangement at all. She turned to look at him. He was watching the gathering with his hands folded, composed in the way he was always composed, not because he felt nothing, but because he had decided what to do with what he felt. I think you should look at what you see, he said. He walked back toward the gathering, toward Marta Briggs and the warmth of the crowd, and she stood in the cold September air and looked at what she saw. She would learn later in pieces what Bennett had said to Silas at the food table that afternoon. The way you learn things that happened without you. Not the whole of it, but enough. You are leaving for California, Bennett had said. That is the plan, Silas had said. When? End of the month. When the weather is still workable. A pause. Then Bennett had said, is that what you want? Or is that what you have decided to want? Silas had looked at him, and Bennett had looked back, and neither of them was performing anything. Two men at a food table in September, with the fiddle going behind them and the mountains in front. I do not know, Silas had said, which was more than he had told anyone. Bennett had nodded as if this confirmed something he suspected. I think you should figure that out, Bennett had said. Before the end of the month. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of October when Silas burned the bread. This sounds small. It was small. He had it out of the oven before it was beyond saving, cut away the bottom crust, and there was enough of the loaf remaining for supper. The house smelled like scorched flour for an hour, and then it did not. That was all. But Colette came in from the south pasture and smelled it and found him in the kitchen with the damaged loaf on the counter and an expression on his face she had never seen before. Not distress exactly. He was not the kind of person who fell apart over burned bread, but something tired behind the eyes, something that had nothing to do with the bread. It is fine, he said before she could speak. I got distracted. She looked at him. Nothing is wrong. Silas. He looked at her, and the tiredness was more visible up close. Not just today's tiredness, but something longer and deeper. The kind that accumulates when you have been moving for a long time without stopping. I got a letter from a woman I used to know, he said. In Nebraska. Her husband died. She has 2 children and a piece of land. She cannot work alone, and she does not know what to do. Colette was quiet. I cannot go back there, Silas said, not defensive, just factual. There is nothing I can do from there that I cannot do from here. Can you help her from here? She looked at him. With what? Letters do not plow fields. Money does, Colette said. I can advance you against future wages, if that would help. You do not know this woman. You do, Colette said. That is enough. He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a wind had come up from the west and was pushing through the pines along the north fence, and the sound of it came through the kitchen window. Low, steady. You are a strange woman, Colette Ashford, he said. I have been told, she said. He looked back at the bread. Something in his face had eased slightly. Not solved, but eased. I will think about it, he said. Do not think too long, she said. She has 2 children. He looked at her again, and something moved across his face that she did not have a word for. Then she left the kitchen before he could answer, and went upstairs to her study, and sat at her desk with nothing in front of her, and understood with the precision of a woman who has run out of ways to pretend otherwise that she was in love with Silas Cain. She understood it the way you understand something you have known for a while, but kept in a drawer because taking it out would mean dealing with it. She took it out now, turned it over, looked at it clearly. She was in love with a man who was passing through her life, on his way to California. She was engaged to a man who deserved better than a woman in love with someone else. She had built everything a person was supposed to build and had managed in the process to arrive here, at this desk, in this house that had finally come alive, with this particular and inconvenient clarity. She sat with it for a while. She did not decide anything. Some things do not get decided the moment you understand them. They just have to be carried for a time while the rest of the situation catches up. That evening, after supper, she went to the kitchen doorway. Silas was at the sink, his back to her. I need to tell you something, she said. He turned from the sink. He read her face the way he read everything. Quickly, accurately, without fuss. Colette, he said. And the way he said her name the first time he had used it directly, without the formality of her title, was itself a kind of answer to a question she had not asked yet. I know you are planning to leave, she said. I know California is what you have decided. I am not asking you to change that. She stopped. She was doing this wrong. She could feel it. She had spent years being good at knowing what to say in negotiations, in business, in the management of land and money and people, and all of that was useless here. What I am asking, she said, is whether you would consider staying long enough to know if there is a reason to. Silas looked at her. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the frost was working on the world. There is Bennett, he said. There is Bennett, she said. And I am not going to pretend that is not real, because it is. But Bennett is a person of uncommon honesty, and he said something to me today that I think you should know. She paused. He said that a partnership built on duty rather than genuine feeling is lonelier than no partnership at all. Silas was very still. He is not wrong, Silas said quietly. No, she said. He is not. A long moment. The lamp on the kitchen shelf threw warm, unsteady light across the space between them. I cannot make a promise, Silas said. I do not make promises I do not know I can keep. I know, she said. I am not asking for one. Then what are you? Just time, she said. Just time. He looked at her for a count that felt long and was probably short. I will think about it, he said. It was the same thing he had said about the money for his friend in Nebraska. She had learned that when Silas Cain said he would think about something, he actually did. He did not use it as a way to close a conversation without committing. He used it as a statement of genuine intention. She had learned to trust it. She nodded once. That is all I am asking, she said, and left the kitchen. She went to find Bennett. He was in the parlor, not reading, not writing, just sitting in the chair nearest the window with his hands in his lap and the lamp low, looking at the darkness outside the glass. She sat down across from him. I owe you a direct conversation, she said. Yes, he said, you do. So she had it, not perfectly. There was no perfect version of this conversation, and she had given up looking for one. But honestly, she told him what she had understood at her desk the afternoon of the burned bread. She told him it was not something she had planned or courted, or in any way wanted to feel, and she believed all of that to be true, because it was. She told him he deserved someone whose whole heart was present, not a woman subdivided by something she had not expected. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she was done, the parlor was quiet. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. That makes it worse. Yes, he said, it does. He looked at his hands. I am not going to pretend I am not hurt, Colette. That would be dishonest, and I do not think either of us benefits from dishonesty right now. No, she said. I came a long way, he said. I left a life I understood. A pause. Whatever you need, she said immediately. Whatever time you need. This house is yours as long as you want it. I do not need you to provide, he said. And it was not sharp, just firm. I am capable of providing for myself. I always have been. He paused. What I need is some time to think, and I would prefer to do it without having to also manage your guilt. She nodded. Then I will manage it myself. Good, he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost dry. She thought, not for the first time, that Bennett Pierce was a person of remarkable character and that whoever he ended up building a life with was going to be the better for it. I am sorry, she said, genuinely. I know you are, he said. Go to bed, Colette. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the frost outside and the deep quiet of the house and tried not to feel like everything was falling apart, while also understanding that some things have to fall apart before they can be put together in a way that actually holds. She was not expecting what happened the next morning. She came downstairs at her usual hour to find Bennett at the kitchen table. Not Silas, just Bennett, with a cup of tea and a piece of paper and the look of a man who has been up for a while thinking. Sit down, he said. She sat. I have decided something, he said. He looked at the paper rather than at her, and then deliberately set it aside and looked at her instead. I am ending the engagement, he said. She waited. Not yet, he said. And not the way you are thinking. He wrapped his hands around his tea. I think that what is happening in this house is something that needs to work itself out. And I think running back to St. Louis, the moment things become difficult, is exactly the wrong thing for me to do. He paused. I did not come all this way to be someone who leaves when it is hard. Bennett, I am ending the engagement, he said, flat clear. That is already decided. That is the right thing. And I know it and you know it. And if we had been more honest with each other a month ago, we would have known it sooner. He looked at his tea. But I am not leaving Silver Creek. Not immediately. I think there is something here for me that has nothing to do with you, and I would like to find out what it is. She stared at him. The county has no proper record keeper, Bennett said. Settlers are losing claims because they cannot read their own documents. They are signing agreements they do not understand, and losing land they should have kept. He looked at her steadily. I was educated in St. Louis. I know how to read legal documents, and I think this community needs what I have to offer more than your mansion does. She did not say anything for a long moment. You want to stay in Silver Creek, she said. I want to do something that matters, he said. And this matters. A pause. We can manage the rest of it properly. The return of the engagement ring, a reasonable explanation for the community. I do not want drama, and I imagine you do not either. No, she said. Then that is settled, he said, and picked up his tea with the finality of a man who has made his decision and will not be revisited on it. She sat across from him in the kitchen of her grand ranch house and felt something she had not anticipated. Not relief exactly, not guilt exactly, but a complicated admiration for the person across the table. He had come out here expecting one life and had found another. And his response was not to collapse or flee, but to look at what was actually in front of him and decide what he could do with it. You are a remarkable man, Bennett Pierce, she said. Yes, he said without self-consciousness. I am. He took a sip of tea. You would have been lucky to have me, I know, she said. Silas Cain is also a remarkable man, he said. I hope you know that too. I do, she said. Then go figure out what you are going to do about it, he said, and let me finish my tea. She found Silas in the barn, the same way she had found him that first Monday morning, crouched near a horse, looking at something with focused attention. Different horse this time. Derry's horse, which had thrown a shoe on the ride back from the Briggs gathering. He heard her come in and did not look up. Bennett ended the engagement, she said. Silas's hands paused on the horse's hoof for a moment, then continued. He told you this morning, Silas said. Yes, he told me last night, Silas said. She stopped. He came to you last night, she said. After I went to bed. Silas set the hoof down and stood. He told me he was ending it. He told me he was staying in Silver Creek. And he told me that whatever happened next in this house was between you and me, and he did not want to be in the middle of it anymore. He turned to face her. He is a good man, he is, she said. The best kind. Silas looked at her with those measuring eyes. Colette, he said, and he used her name again the way he had the night before. Directly, without the distance of formality. Then his expression changed. Not softer, harder if anything. So your engagement ends, he said, and you come to the barn to tell me. She felt the words land. What am I supposed to do with that? He said. She did not answer immediately. She had not expected this. I am not something you slot into the place someone just left, Colette. I am not here to fill a space because someone else walked out of it. The barn was quiet. The horse shifted its weight. Morning light through the slats lay in pale bars across the straw floor. That is not what this is, she said. Then what is it? Because from where I am standing, a woman with a grand house and an empty engagement just walked into this barn looking for the nearest warm body. The words should have made her angry. They did not. They made something in her chest ache, because he was right to ask, and because the question underneath that Shanton was not whether she wanted him, but whether she wanted him for the right reasons. And if I were you, I would ask the same thing. She sat down on a bale of hay. Not a calculated move. Just suddenly tired of standing while something important was happening. I am not asking you to fill anything, she said. I am asking you whether what has been happening between us is something you want to find out about, or whether it is just me. Silas looked at her for a long time. She let herself be looked at. No defense, no persuasion. Just a woman sitting on hay in a barn in the early morning, telling the truth, because it was the only currency she had left. It is not just you, he said. Quiet. Something in the barn changed, not dramatically. The light did not shift. The horse did not move. But the quality of the silence between them was different than it had been 10 seconds ago. Then stay long enough to know what it is, she said. A beat. If I stay, he said, I am staying as myself. Not as a housekeeper. Not as an arrangement. As myself, whatever that looks like in practice. That is what I want, she said. You do not know what that means yet, he said. No, she admitted. I do not. He considered her. She sat there and let herself be considered, which was not a comfortable thing, but it was the honest thing, and she had come to understand that honesty was the only currency Silas Cain traded in. All right, he said finally. I will stay. The barn was quiet. The horse shifted its weight again. The October light came through the slats and lay across them both. Thank you, she said. Do not thank me, he said. I am not doing you a favor. I am doing myself one. He picked up the brush he had set down when she came in. Now go tell your foreman about this horse's shoe. I found a crack in the wall of the hoof on the near side that is going to be a problem if it is not addressed. She stood for a moment. Then she went to find Nettie as instructed and told her about the horse's shoe and said nothing else. And Nettie looked at her once and then at the barn and said, right, in the tone of a woman who had been watching things, arranged themselves for 3 weeks and was not particularly surprised by where they had landed. The day Bennett Pierce moved to the boarding house in Silver Creek was a gray Wednesday in late October with the smell of coming snow in the air and a stillness over the territory that meant the season was finally changing. He packed his things with efficiency. He did not own much that was suited to the frontier, and he had already arranged with Marta Briggs for introductions to the families who needed help with their land records. Colette carried the trunk to the wagon. Silas stood at the door of the house he had spent 3 weeks making livable. Bennett paused on the porch steps and looked at Silas. The bread was still good, he said, even burned. Silas's mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but the thing it turns into before a smile. The bottom crust was a loss, he said. The rest was fine, Bennett said firmly. Then take care of this house, Silas. It waited a long time to feel like some people live. Silas looked at him steadily. I know, he said. I will. Bennett nodded once, the nod of a man who has said what he came to say and does not need to elaborate. He climbed into the wagon beside Colette, and she drove him to Silver Creek, and the drive was quiet but not painful. Two people who had navigated something difficult and come out the other side without losing respect for each other, which is rarer than most people acknowledge. At the boarding house, he stepped down from the wagon and she handed down the trunk, and he looked at her with his clear, steady eyes. Be good to him, he said. Not careful with him. Good to him there is a difference, I know, she said. No, you do not, he said. Not unkindly, but you will learn. He picked up his bag and went inside, and she stood beside the wagon in the gray October air and watched the door close. That same afternoon, Nettie found Colette in the study. The first evening alone in the house was the quietest thing Colette had experienced since Silas arrived. Not silent. There was sound. There was always sound now. The stove settling, Silas moving through the kitchen, the particular rhythm of a house that has people in it. But the third voice was gone, and the space it left was specific and shaped. Silas made dinner without comment. He set 2 places at the table instead of 3, and the simple mathematics of that adjustment carried more weight than it should have. They ate across from each other for the first time without Bennett as a buffer between them, and the conversation that happened was ordinary, and the conversation that did not happen was enormous. After dinner, Silas went to the back door and stood looking at the yard. I want to plant a kitchen garden, he said, off the east side. The soil there is good and it gets morning light. She looked at him. You are planning for spring? She said. It was October. He looked at her over his shoulder. I am planning for whatever comes next, he said, and went outside to look at the soil. She stood at the back door and watched him crouch in the October dirt, testing the earth between his fingers, and understood that planting a garden was not about vegetables. It was about staying. There is something you should know, Nettie said. She stood in the doorway with her hat in her hands, which was unusual. Nettie did not usually hold her hat. She wore it or she hung it. Holding it meant she was choosing her words. That Holt fellow, Nettie said. The one from the Briggs gathering. He has taken a room at the boarding house. Has been there. Looked up from the ledger. Staying for what? Land? Nettie said. He has been talking to people about the valley parcels south of town. She paused. He has also been into the land office. Talking to Petrie. More than once. About what? Nettie looked at her hat. About you, she said. About your property. The water rights on the East Fork specifically. The room went still. Thomas and Garrett at the boarding house confirmed it, Nettie said. Holt receives letters from St. Louis every week. He has met with P. Tree 3 times. And he has been asking the smaller ranchers south of town about their grazing agreements with you. The ones that are not, she paused, formally documented. Colette set down the ledger. The East Fork water rights. The grazing access agreements. The shape of this was familiar in a way that made her jaw tighten, though she could not yet say exactly why. When did this start? She said. Far as Thomason can tell, Nettie said about a month ago. A month ago, October the gathering, Gerald Holt, standing at the food table talking to Silas Cain. She kept her face even. Thank you, Nettie. She said, I will look into it. Thought you might want to, Nettie said, and left. Colette sat for a moment. Then she went to find Silas. He was in the kitchen, as he often was at mid-morning, doing the household accounting he had taken over in recent years. Not because she had asked, but because he had looked at her system one day and reorganized it in a way that made it take half the time. She stood in the doorway until he looked up. Gerald Holt, she said. The man from the October gathering. Did he speak to you about this property? He set down his pen. His face did the thing it did when he was thinking too carefully before speaking. A slight stillness, the kind you would miss if you were not paying attention. He asked me about the house, Silas said, when we were talking at the table. Whether it was as well established as it looked, whether the land holdings were clear, whether the water access was documented. He met her eyes. I said I did not know the details and changed the subject. You did not mention this to me. I did not know it was significant, he said. He seemed like someone trying to impress a woman with his knowledge of land values. He paused. Was I wrong? Maybe not then, she said. He has been in Silver Creek since October. He has been asking questions at the land office. Silas was quiet, but his expression had shifted, sharpened. A look she had seen before. The one that meant he was connecting things. The East Fork, he said. She looked at him. That is what he asked about specifically, Silas said. At the gathering, he used those words, not just the water, but that branch specifically. He sat up straighter. Colette, what is the documentation situation on the East Fork? Something uncomfortable moved through her. There is an original claim, she said slowly, filed in '69. But the survey markers, two of them were replaced when the county resurveyed in '73, and I have not confirmed that the replacements matched the originals. His face. She knew immediately from his face. Where are your original claim papers? He said. In the study, in the file box. He was already standing. Get them, he said, now, today. And get the county survey records from '73 and compare every marker listed. He was moving toward the doorway. If there is a discrepancy, any discrepancy, between what was filed in '69 and what the county recorded in '73, someone with money and a lawyer can use it. She was very still. This is the same shape, he said, and he stopped himself from saying more, but what was in his face was not uncertainty. It was recognition. The particular hard-edged recognition of someone who has seen a thing before and knows exactly what it becomes. The same shape, she repeated. He looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was older than this conversation, older than Silver Creek, something carried from a long way back. He said, she went and got the papers. They spent 2 days on it. Silas and Colette at her study desk with the original claim papers and the county survey ledger she rode to the next town to obtain, not from Petrie at the Silver Creek land office, whose connection to Holt made her cautious, but from the county recorder, who kept duplicates as recorders were required to do. Silas went through the documents with a systematic thoroughness that surprised even her. He could read land survey notation, not perfectly, but enough. The way he knew enough about field medicine and horse care and everything else he had learned by necessity along the way. He compared markers and measurements with a pencil and a piece of paper, checking and rechecking. He found it on the second day, a marker notation on the East Fork's northern boundary that had been recorded in the '73 survey as moved 12 feet south of the original '69 position. 12, enough to place the primary intake point of the East Fork on the far side of the boundary line. If the '73 notation stood as the legal record, Colette did not own the intake. She owned the fork, but not where the water entered it. She looked at the notation for a long time. Someone moved it, she said, or recorded it as moved, Silas said, which amounts to the same thing legally. He put the pencil down. Who did the '73 survey? She thought. County contracted someone from Billings, she said. I did not attend. I was dealing with a cattle sickness that summer. Was there a witness signature on the survey? She looked at the ledger. There was a witness signature. The name was not one she recognized. They had been working at the same desk for 2 days, heads together over the same papers, his hand occasionally moving to point at a line, her shoulder near his, in the lamplit study on a January afternoon with snow coming down outside the window. At one point, he reached for a different paper, and his hand passed over hers, and neither of them moved for a moment. Then he took the paper, and she returned to reading, and neither of them mentioned it. But the air in the room had changed, and they both knew it. That night, Colette woke at 3 in the morning to the smell of coffee. She lay still for a moment listening. Then she got up and went downstairs. The kitchen lamp was lit. Silas was sitting at the table. In front of him were three things: the survey papers, a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and his leather travel bag, the one he had brought from the boarding house the first morning he arrived. The bag was packed. Colette stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the bag and felt something cold move through her chest. "What are you doing?" she said, thinking. He did not look up. With a packed bag? A long silence. The stove ticked. The wind outside pushed against the house, and the house held. "The last time I saw this," Silas said. His voice was low and even, the way it always was, but there was something underneath it that she had never heard before. The documents. The discrepancy. A man with money asking the right questions at the right time. He stopped. "I was 22, he said. "I was standing in my father's kitchen in Nebraska, and I watched him read a letter that told him his land was not his anymore." He looked at the bag. "There was a man named Carver," he said. "He had money and a lawyer and documents my father could not read well enough to understand what he was signing. By the time I understood what was happening, the land was gone. The water rights were gone. Everything my father had built for 20 years was gone. In the time it took a county clerk to file a piece of paper." Colette sat down across from him, not beside him. Across. Because that was still where the conversation needed to happen, face to face. "My father lost 2 fingers that same winter," Silas said. "Frostbite. He kept working. With 8 fingers and a piece of land that was not his anymore, and 2 children he was trying to raise alone. He worked until there was nothing left to work." "What happened to him?" Colette said. "He died," Silas said. "Not that winter. 3 years later. But the land going took something out of him that he did not get back." He looked at the bag again. "Part of me wants to be gone before morning," he said, "so I do not have to stand in another kitchen and watch it happen again." She looked at him across the table in the lamplight. This man who had carried that story across 3 territories and 1,000 miles and had converted it not into bitterness but into knowledge, who knew about water rights because his father had lost them, who knew about documentation because documentation had destroyed his family, who had said at the Briggs gathering, without knowing he was speaking from the deepest part of himself, "County records have a way of being misfiled when someone with money needs them to be. This time you enough," she said, "and this time you are not standing alone." He looked at her. "That is the part that scares me worse," he said. "Last time I had nothing to lose except a father who had already given up. This time," he stopped. "This time you have something," she said. "Yes," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I do." The kitchen was quiet. The wind worked against the walls. The house held. Then Silas reached for the bag. He opened it. He took the contents out, piece by piece, and set them on the chair beside him. Then he closed the empty bag and pushed it aside. "Write the letter to Garrison," he said. "The lawyer in Helena. I will help you with the language." She let out a breath she had not known she was holding. They wrote to Garrison that afternoon. Silas sat beside her at the desk, beside her, not across, and they went over the language together, tightening the description of the discrepancy, making the case as clear as possible. She sent the letter with her fastest writer that evening. The weeks that followed tested the particular architecture of what they were building. The waiting, the not knowing. Garrison's reply would take time, and in that time, the ordinary demands of the ranch did not pause to accommodate the extraordinary situation unfolding inside its legal boundaries. There were cattle to move before the worst of winter. There was equipment to store. There was the daily relentless work of keeping a 4,000-acre operation alive when the ground froze and the daylight shortened to a few pale hours. They worked side by side through November without talking about the letter or the land dispute or what any of it might mean. Not because they were avoiding it, but because Silas had taught her something without meaning to. Some things require waiting without narration. You do the work. You trust the process you have set in motion. You do not fill the silence with anxiety because the silence is doing its own work. Douglas Haverford came when Colette rode out to ask him. He was a man of 60, burned by weather to the consistency of old leather, and he had opinions about everything and expressed them without invitation. He sat at Colette's kitchen table with a cup of Silas's coffee, which he accepted with the expression of a man surprised to find something this good in a house that used to make terrible coffee, and he looked at the survey documents. I was at that survey, he said. Colette straightened. Not all of it, Haverford said. I was riding by. I stopped to see what they were doing. He pointed to the marker notation without touching the paper. That marker was not where they wrote it down. The original position was at least 10 feet north of where they recorded it. I said something at the time. The surveyor told me I was misremembering and to move along. He looked up. I should have pushed harder. Would you testify to that? Silas said. Haverford looked at him. He had been looking at Silas since he sat down, not rudely, but with the attention of a man calibrating. You the man who told me about the water rights paperwork, he said. At the Briggs gathering. Yes, Silas said. Haverford looked at him another moment. To who, he said. A lawyer? A judge? Either, Silas said. Whoever ends up hearing it. Haverford drank his coffee. He set it down and looked at the ceiling for a count of 5. Yes, he said. I will testify. He looked at Colette. And you should know that Petrie at the land office has been talking to that Holt fellow more than he should. I do not know what they have said, but I know Petrie, and I know what he looks like when someone has put money near him. Good coffee, he said to Silas as he left, as though this were the most important thing to establish. A week later, Gerald Holt came to the ranch. He arrived on horseback in the late morning, well-dressed and unhurried, with the particular ease of a man accustomed to walking onto other people's property and making it feel like a social call. He tied his horse at the post and came up the porch steps and knocked as if he were expected. Colette answered the door. Miss Ashford, Holt said with a smile that was warm and practiced and contained nothing behind it. I hope I am not intruding. She let him into the parlor because refusing would have shown her hand. She offered him coffee because that was what you did. Thus, Silas brought it from the kitchen without expression and remained standing near the parlor door in a way that could have been professional attentiveness and could have been something else entirely. Holt took the coffee, sat down, and got to the point with the directness of a man who believed directness was a sign of respect rather than aggression. I represent an investment group based in St. Louis, he said. We have been looking at properties in this part of the territory, specifically properties with strong water access. He paused. Your East Fork water rights are valuable, Miss Ashford. Very valuable. And I understand from the county records that the documentation situation is. He searched for the word, not entirely straightforward. Colette kept her expression neutral. My rights are not complicated, she said. They are documented. Holt smiled again. The same warm practice smile. Documented in 1869, he said. Resurveyed in 1873. I wonder which document a court would consider controlling. The room went very still. Silas stepped forward from the doorway. I have seen this play out before, Holt said, and his voice was still pleasant, but his eyes had shifted to something cooler. 3 times in Wyoming alone. The landowners who fought spent everything they had on legal fees, and most of them lost anyway. The ones who sold walked away with something. He looked at Colette. I am offering a clean resolution. A purchase of the East Fork water rights at a price I think you will find very generous. It avoids the expense and uncertainty of a dispute, Silas said, and the ones who had the right paperwork. Holt turned to look at him. He recognized Silas from the October gathering. Colette could see the recognition move across his face and the recalculation that followed it. I am sorry, Holt said. I do not believe we have been formally introduced. He works here, Colette said. Holt looked at Silas for a long moment. Then he looked back at Colette. Think about it, he said. The offer will not last. He stood, set down the coffee cup, and walked out of the parlor with the unhurried ease of a man who believed he was holding the stronger hand. After the front door closed, Silas stood at the window and watched Holt ride away. He is confident, Silas said. That means he does not know we have already found the discrepancy. He thinks we are unprepared, Colette said. He thinks you are what my father was, Silas said. Someone who does not check their paperwork until it is too late. Garrison's letter came back in 3 weeks. It confirmed what Silas had found. The discrepancy was real and legally significant. The 73 survey notation was almost certainly inaccurate, whether by error or intention. But the letter contained something else, something they had not known. Gerald Holt was not acting alone. He was the representative of a St. Louis investment group that had been quietly acquiring disputed land claims across 3 territories using the same method. Identify properties with documentation gaps, engineer or exploit survey discrepancies, then offer a forced sale as a preferable alternative to litigation. 3 ranchers in Wyoming had already sold at below value. One had fought it and won, but the legal costs had nearly broken him. 2 had fought and lost. And in the list of investors and associated entities that Garrison had traced, through county records and corporate filings, there was a name. Not Carver directly, but a company that Carver had once held interest in. A connection. A thread that led back through a decade of land acquisitions to the same network that had taken a piece of Nebraska from a man with 8 fingers and 2 children who did not know how to stop him. Silas read the letter twice. His face when he set it down was not grief. It had been grief once, a long time ago, and had been converted through years and distance into something harder and more useful. I could not stop it then, he said. I was 22 and I did not know enough and I did not have anyone who knew more. He looked up at Colette. This is stoppable, he said. Yes, she said, it is. They went to Silver Creek the next morning. Together. Not to the county court, which fell under Petrie's influence, but to a territorial judge who had ridden circuit through Silver Creek for a decade and had a reputation for thoroughness that bordered on stubbornness. They brought Garrison's letter, the original claim, the 73 survey, with the discrepancy annotated, and Douglas Haverford's written statement. The judge read everything. He asked questions. He was direct and unsentimental in the way of people who have spent their careers finding out what is actually true. He issued a formal notice that day, a stay on any transfer or dispute proceeding regarding the Ashford East Fork water rights, pending a full review of the 1873 survey. He also sent a formal inquiry to the county recorder's office, which had the immediate effect of making Petrie very pale when he heard about it. Gerald Holt left Silver Creek 2 weeks later. He left quietly, without announcement, the way people leave when a plan has stopped working. Petrie resigned from the land office the following week. Bennett, who had been watching the situation from his position at the boarding house, sent a note that said simply, "Well done. The new county record keeper will need help organizing the files Petrie left behind. I have volunteered." It was the kind of thing Bennett did, found the useful work and stepped into it without being asked. Nettie brought Colette a piece of news the following week that landed differently than expected. The Garrett brothers had received a letter from the same St. Louis group that Holt represented, offering to buy their grazing agreement. They had turned it down, not because of the legal proceedings, not because of Colette's influence, because, as the older Garrett brother told Nettie, that Cain fellow told me to get my documents in order back in September. And I did, and now I have papers that say exactly what they should say. Nobody is taking anything from me. Silas did not know about this conversation. Colette did not tell him. She kept it in the same place. She kept a growing collection of things she had noticed about Silas Cain. Not secrets, just evidence. The kind that accumulates when you watch someone long enough to see the full shape of who they are. The evening after the judge's notice was issued, Colette and Silas drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon dark. January dark came early and completely in Montana, and the cold was serious, and the sky was clear above it in the way that meant the temperature would drop further before morning. She had expected to feel relief. She did feel relief, but there was something else alongside it. Something that had to do with the 2 weeks they had spent at the same desk, working on the same problem. Something that had to do with the fact that Silas had brought to this situation knowledge he carried because of loss, and that the loss had, in this case, become something that mattered. You know what you did, she said. You spotted a problem and helped address it. That is one way to say it, he said. Another way is that you protected something that is yours too, if you want it to be. He was quiet for a moment. The horses moved through the dark. I have not wanted to be somewhere this specifically since I was a boy, he said. That scares me because the things I have specifically wanted have a history of being taken. I am not in a hurry, she said. He turned to look at her in the dark with the cold around them and the stars overhead. Yes, you are, he said, and there was something in it that was almost a smile. You are just being patient about it. She almost laughed. That is true, she said. I notice, he said. I notice how patient you are. I notice that you do not push. And I notice that you do not make me feel like I owe you something for staying. Some men would do that. Some women would do that. For what it is worth, she said, noticing goes both ways. Nettie brought another piece of the Holt situation to light the following week. She had been talking to the Garrett brothers, who owned the small parcel east of town. They mentioned that Holt had approached them about selling their grazing agreement with Colette, not the land itself, the agreement. The right to graze on Ashford pastures that Colette had extended to them informally 3 years ago. Colette sat very still when Nettie told her this. He is building a picture, Silas said from the kitchen doorway. He was listening, which he did, not sneaking, just present. Colette had stopped being surprised by how much he heard. Every informal agreement you have is a point of vulnerability. If he can show that you have been operating on handshakes instead of documents, it weakens your position if this goes to court. She looked at him. You have seen this before, she said. It was not a question anymore. It was a statement of something she understood. I have seen everything he is doing before, Silas said. Different names, different towns, same shape. There was a weight in the way he said it that told her the rest of the Nebraska story was still there, underneath everything, and that it was not a small story. That week, Silas began going through the ranch's paperwork with a thoroughness that bordered on obsessive. He asked Colette to show him every agreement, every handshake deal, every informal arrangement she had made with neighbors over the past decade. Some of them she had forgotten about entirely. He found them in the filing box, or in letters, or in her memory when he asked the right questions. You are building a defense, she said, watching him organize papers at the kitchen table one evening. I am building a record, he said. A defense assumes someone is attacking. A record is just the truth, written down, so no one can pretend it's something else. She looked at him in the lamplight. This man, who had spent 3 years on the frontier, converting loss into competence, and felt something that was not gratitude and not love exactly, but the specific, grounding recognition of a person who knew what mattered and did not waste time on what did not. December brought a cold that made November look mild. The thermometer outside the kitchen door showed temperatures that made Nettie shake her head. The hands doubled up in the bunkhouse. The cattle were moved to the most sheltered pastures. The days shortened until it felt like the sun was only a brief interruption in the dark. What happened was that necessity created a different kind of closeness than intention would have. There was a night in early December when one of the younger heifers got turned around in the dark and ended up in a gully with a broken leg. Colette went out with Silas and two hands when they heard the animal. She had told Silas to stay at the house. He had ignored her. They were out for 2 hours in below-zero temperatures. The work was not pleasant. Somewhere in the second hour, on a slope of ice-covered rock, Silas's horse lost its footing. The animal stumbled sideways, and Silas went off the saddle and hit the frozen ground with his left shoulder at an angle that produced a sound Colette heard over the wind. She was off her own horse and beside him in seconds. He was sitting up, which was a good sign, but his left arm was held tight against his body, and his face in the lantern light was the particular gray of someone managing serious pain. Shoulder, he said through his teeth. Dislocated. Not broken. You cannot know that, she said. I know what broken feels like, he said. This is not that, but it needs to go back in. She looked at him. You want me to set it? I am going to tell you how, he said. And you are going to do it. And then we are going to get that heifer out of the gully, because we did not ride out here for nothing. She set his shoulder in the dark on a frozen hillside in Montana in December, following his calm, precise instructions through the wind, and when the joint went back in, he made a sound that was quiet and brief and told her everything about what it had cost him not to make a louder one. They got the heifer out. They rode back to the ranch at 2 in the morning with Silas holding his left arm still against his body and Colette leading his horse alongside hers. In the kitchen, the roles reversed completely. She built the stove up high. She made the coffee. She set a basin of warm water on the table and took his good hand and held it in the warmth the way he had once held hers in a different version of this scene that she had imagined but never lived. He sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning with the stove ticking and the house holding against the cold and let her take care of him, which was its own kind of trust. He had not let anyone take care of him in a long time. She could see it in the way he kept almost reaching for things with his good hand, almost getting up, almost insisting he was fine, and then stopping himself and letting her. My mother always said this house was built the wrong way around, she said. He looked at her. What does that mean? I built the outside first, she said. The land, the structure, the reputation, and left the inside to figure itself out. She paused. She was not wrong. No, Silas said, she was not. Colette looked at his hands. The left one was starting to swell, where the shoulder had stressed the muscles down the arm. I do not know how to build the inside of things, she said. I have been trying to learn that this fall. He was quiet for a moment. The wind pushed against the house. The stove popped and settled. You are better at it than you think, he said. The fact that you know it needs building is further along than most. It was not a declaration. It was not the kind of thing you could hold on to and point to and say, there, that was the moment. But it was something. And in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with the wind outside and the coffee warm, something was enough. In late January, Silas received a letter from California. It was from a man he had worked for briefly 2 years earlier on a ranch outside Sacramento. The man had a proposition. Good land available cheap in the valley, work that needed doing. A place where someone with Silas's skills could build something of his own. Silas brought the letter to Colette and set it on the kitchen table between them. I want you to see this, he said. So you know I am staying because I chose to, not because I ran out of options. She picked up the letter. Read it. It was a real offer, specific and concrete. Land, work, a future in a place that was not here. She folded it and set it back on the table. Thank you for showing me, she said. He looked at her across the table. I wrote back this morning, he said. I told him I had found what I was looking for. She held his gaze. She did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would have been better than the silence. February brought a wind out of the northwest that lasted 4 days without break and drove snow horizontal across the pastures and made the world outside the windows look like something being erased. Inside, the house held. On the second day of the wind, Colette was in her study going through the final correspondence from Garrison when Silas appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. Garrison's letter confirms everything, she said without looking up. The review board has accepted the original claim as controlling. The 73 notation has been flagged as a likely transcription error. Likely, he said, diplomatically worded. She agreed. But the effect is the same. The East Fork is clean. He set a cup on the corner of her desk and sat down in the armchair beside the window. Not the visitor's chair where he would have sat 3 months ago. The armchair she had stopped thinking of as a visitor's chair and started thinking of simply as his. They sat like that for a while, the wind outside and the warmth inside, and he said something she did not expect. I wrote to the Garrett brothers, he said, about formalizing their grazing agreement with you. Properly. On paper. So no one can use it against either side again. She looked at him. And I wrote to Bennett, he said, about setting up a proper records office. Not just for settlers. For everyone in the territory who has an agreement they cannot read or a claim they have not verified. So what happened to my father does not happen to anyone in Silver Creek. He paused. If that is all right with you, he said, it was more than all right. It was the first time Silas Cain had spoken about the future as if it contained him. Not California. Not the next place. This place. These people. This work. She looked at him. I want to ask you something, she said. He looked at her steadily. Not today, she said. Oh, I want to wait until the weather breaks. I want to ask you properly. But I want you to know I am going to ask. You are telling me so I have time to think, he said. Yes. A long pause. He looked at the window, the white nothing outside. I have been thinking since October, he said. I know, she said. I know you have. He looked back at her. What was in his face was not simple. It was never simple with Silas. Nothing settled at the surface when there was something real underneath. But it was clear, clearer than she had seen it. Ask me when the weather breaks, he said. She nodded. That was enough. The weather broke on a Thursday. Not dramatically. The wind simply stopped sometime in the night, and by morning the world was still, and the sky was the clean, washed blue that comes after a sustained storm, and the snow lay deep and undisturbed over everything, and the air was cold and clear and perfectly silent. She did not ask him at breakfast because Nettie came in with the damage report and there were 3 hours of work ahead. She did not ask him at midday because he was dealing with a situation in the kitchen involving preserved fruit and a question about the root cellar temperature. She did not ask him in the afternoon because Derry came to the house with a cut on his forearm from a broken fence rail and Silas bandaged it one-handed, his left shoulder still stiff from December, with the efficiency that characterized everything he did. She found him after supper, He was in the back hallway putting on his coat. I was going to check the kitchen garden, he said. See what the wind did to the frames. I will come, she said. He looked at her. He knew. She could see that he knew. All right, he said. They went out into the late blue evening, the snow crunching under their boots, the air still and cold and carrying the smell of pine from the north tree line. The kitchen garden was off the east side of the house. The small beds Silas had claimed and cultivated since October, covered now with frames and straw against the winter, most of which had held. He checked the frames without hurrying, pressing each one, clearing snow where it had drifted against the edges. She helped without being asked, which was how they had learned to do things together, not dividing labor formally, but reading what was needed and moving toward it. When he had checked the last, he stood up and looked at the garden for a moment. 3 of the frames on the north side need repairing, he said. Nothing lost underneath. Good, she said. He stood. She stood. The stars were coming out overhead. Silas Cain, she said. He turned to look at her. I know what you came here as, she said. And I know that what you are is not what I hired and not what you were planning to be, and not anything either of us expected. She stopped. She had planned something better than this, something better organized, and it was going the way real things go, imperfectly, with the wrong words in the wrong order. I know you have been alone a long time, she said. I know what you lost and what it cost you. I know you did not stop anywhere because stopping meant feeling how tired you were. And I know this place asked you to stop, and you were afraid of what that meant. He was very still. I am not asking you to stop being who you are, she said. I'm not asking you to fold yourself into something smaller so it fits a shape you did not choose. She paused. I'm asking you to let this be yours. The house, the garden, the East Fork in the land, and me, if you will have me, as your husband. Not because you need a wife, not because I need someone to run my house, because you are the most real person I have ever known, and I do not want to know what this place feels like without you in it. The garden was quiet. The cold was quiet. Somewhere across the north pasture, an owl called once and then did not call again. Silas looked at her for a long time. She let herself be looked at, which she had learned was what he needed. Not to be persuaded or reassured, but to see, to take the honest measure of things before he committed to them. You know I will fix things without telling you, he said. I know, she said. And I will tell you when you are wrong. I am counting on it, she said, and I am not. He paused. I am not a soft person, Colette. I do not know how to be soft. People who have lived the way I have lived. He stopped. I do not want soft, she said. I want you. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not broke, not collapsed, but shifted. The way things shift when they have been held rigid a long time and are given permission to find their actual position. Yes, he said. One word. Flat, plain. No decoration on it. He exhaled. Yes, he said again quietly, as if he was hearing it himself for the first time. All right, yes. She did not reach for him immediately. She understood that even yes needed a moment to settle. And then he stepped toward her, which was itself an answer of a different kind, and she put her arms around him in the cold garden with the stars overhead and the Montana this winter all around them. And he stood still for a moment, and then his arms went around her too, and they stood like that in the dark for a while. 2 people who had taken the long way to this moment and were not inclined to rush past it. They told Nettie the next morning. Her response was to look at her hat, turn it once in her hands, and say, about time, with the tone of a woman who had been waiting for something and was not particularly surprised it had arrived. They wrote to Bennett the same day. Separate letters, not a joint one. Silas sat at the kitchen table and wrote his without asking for help, and when he was done, he sealed it without showing her the contents, which she understood was correct. Some things between people are their own. Bennett's response arrived within the week. He had apparently ridden to town to send it the same day he received their letters. It was warm and direct in Bennett's way. No performance, no pretense. He said he was glad. He said it without qualification. He said Silver Creek had turned out to be exactly the right place for him, and that the settlers he was helping with their land records had a combined stubbornness that was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. And he said he had recently had several very good dinners at the boarding house with a woman named Wren Harlow, who asked careful, thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in his answers, and that he was not making any announcements, but wanted them to know that his life here was good. Colette folded the letter and set it on the kitchen table. He is all right, she said. I know, Silas said. He was reading his own letter and he was smiling, not the almost smile she had gotten used to watching for, but an actual smile. Full and unguarded. It was a remarkable thing to see. "What does he say?" she said. "He says I had better make sure the wedding has good food," Silas said, "because he has been eating at the boarding house for 3 months, and he is developing opinions." She laughed. She laughed genuinely, the way you do when something is simply funny and you are not managing yourself about it. And Silas folded his letter and smiled at her across the kitchen table. And it was an ordinary moment in every way, except that it was not ordinary at all. March brought mud and the particular restlessness that comes before spring on the frontier. The ground was not ready yet, but the sky was promising things, and Colette found herself standing at the kitchen window one morning, watching Silas walk the east garden with a measuring stick and a piece of string, laying out rows for the spring planting with the same precision he brought to everything. Nettie appeared beside her at the window. "He is planting the garden as if he has been here 10 years, Nettie said. Colette watched him crouch and press the soil between his fingers, testing the moisture, judging the thaw. "He has been here 6 months, Colette said. Nettie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some people arrive slowly. Some people arrive all at once and just take a while to admit it." She looked at Colette. "He arrived in September," Nettie said. "He has been admitting it ever since." They were married in April. The ground had been soft for 2 weeks by then, the frost gone from the topsoil, the first green pushing up through the south pastures, and the territory had shed its winter the way it always did, all at once as if it had simply decided to be done with it. The wedding was at the Briggs place, because Marta Briggs had structured the entire social infrastructure of the event in a way that made any other location impractical, and because the Briggs yard had 40 feet of flat ground that Marta had known, apparently since January, would be needed for tables. People came from across the territory. Ranching families Colette had known for a decade. Families Silas had come to know through the winter, through Marta's network, through Douglas Haverford, who arrived with his wife and 3 grown sons, all 4 of whom separately told Silas he had done good work on the survey dispute. Bennett was there. He arrived with Wren Harlow, a quiet woman from Billings who had come to Silver Creek on business 2 months ago and had apparently found more reason to stay than business alone provided. Bennett introduced her without fanfare. Colette looked at them together and then looked at Silas. "He seems happy," she said. "Good," Silas said. "He needs someone who listens. He is the smartest person in most rooms. He needs someone who knows it and is not threatened by it." "Like you," Colette said. "I am not the smartest person in most rooms," Silas said. "You are in every room I have been in with you," she said. He started to say something. She could see him assembling a deflection, the reflex he still had, the old habit of redirecting anything that came too close. And then he stopped. He looked at her. He let it land. "Thank you," he said. Simply, she had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting for him to do that, to receive something without immediately redirecting it away. "Ready?" she said. "Ask me something easier," he said. But he took her arm. The ceremony was not elaborate. Neither of them had wanted elaborate. A judge, the same territorial judge who had issued the stay on the water rights dispute, spoke the necessary words in the April afternoon with the mountains visible above the crowd and the smell of the greening territory in the air. Silas held her gaze through the whole of it with the direct steadiness that was the most fundamentally Silas thing about him. And when the time came for the words he had to say, he said them in a voice that was clear and unhurried and contained no drama whatsoever, which was exactly right. When it was done and the gathered crowd produced the noise that gathered crowds produce, at these moments, he looked at her, and she looked at him, and he said, quietly enough that only she could hear it, "Well, that is done." She laughed. She could not help it. "That is done," she agreed. "Good," he said. And then the crowd was around them, and Marta Briggs was producing food from somewhere. And the fiddle players had started up something that was probably supposed to be dignified, but was already getting faster. And the April afternoon became the April evening, and then the kind of night that springs up in the territory when the weather is good, and people have been isolated all winter, and have decided collectively to celebrate. Marta Briggs found Colette near the dessert table, and stood beside her without speaking for a moment. Then she said, "I knew in September." Colette looked at her. "At the gathering," Marta said, "when he brought that pie. A man who bakes like that for a table full of strangers is a man who has decided to belong somewhere. He just had not told himself." She patted Colette's arm and went to organize something else, because organizing was what Marta did, and the evening was not going to organize itself. Bennett found Silas sometime in the middle of the evening. Colette saw them from across the yard, standing slightly apart from the main noise. Two men talking with the ease of people who had established, in 4 strange months, a respect that neither of them had anticipated, and neither was inclined to analyze too carefully. She thought about what it meant that the man she had intended to marry and the man she had married were standing in the April night, talking like old friends, and that no one had been destroyed and no life had been ruined, and that things had, against the general odds of human situations, worked out in a way that was better for everyone than the original plan would have been. This was not, she understood, the usual outcome. Usually someone paid more. Usually the cost was larger and the ledger less balanced. What had made this possible was not luck. It was the specific character of the people involved. Bennett's refusal to let duty stand in for honesty, Silas's refusal to take what was not freely given, and her own willingness, late in arriving but genuinely arrived at, to tell the truth about what she actually felt rather than what she was supposed to feel. They drove home late, just the two of them, the same road they had driven in October and November and January. Familiar now, in the way that roads become familiar when you have taken them in enough weathers and enough states of mind. The house came into view the way it always did, and she stopped the horses for a moment without meaning to. Silas looked at her. "I always stop here," she said, "since October. I do not know why." "I know," he said. "I have watched you from the window." She looked at him. "You have watched me stop in the road and look at the house several times," he said. "I wondered what you were looking at." "I was trying to understand it," she said. "Why it looked different." He looked at the house in the spring dark with the lamps Nettie had left burning in the front windows. It was warm. It had been warm since October. She had gotten so accustomed to it that she almost did not notice anymore, which was itself a kind of answer. "The house did not change," Silas said. "You changed what you were looking for." She sat with that for a moment. The horses stood patiently. "You have thought about this," she said. "I thought about a lot of things in October," he said, "before I agreed to stay." "What made you agree?" she said. "Actually, what was the thing that did it?" He was quiet for a moment. "You offered me money for a woman you had never met," he said, "because I was sad about her situation, and you wanted me to have less to carry." He paused. That small, pointless generosity. No benefit to you. Just you saw something heavy and wanted to help lift it. She did not say anything. "People who do that," he said, "are rare. I have been on the frontier long enough to know how rare." He looked at her. "That is what I agreed to. Not the house, not the land, not any of the things a woman like you could offer a man like me. That." She looked at him for a moment in the spring dark. "The money," she said. "Did it help her?" "Your friend in Nebraska." A pause. "Yes," he said. "Her brother-in-law came out. The letter she sent in December. She said she is all right. Children are all right." "Good," she said. "Yes," he said. "Good." She clicked the horses forward and they came down the last stretch to the house. She helped him down from the wagon, though he did not need help, and they went in through the front door, not the back. The front, which was the right door for tonight. Silas stood in the front hallway and looked at the house the way she had stood in the road and looked at it. "What?" she said. "I am looking at it," he said. "At what? Specifically?" He turned to her. "At the fact that it is mine," he said, and the plainness of it, the total absence of performance, was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her in her life. The spring came in fully, and the ranch expanded into it. The cattle did well. The winter loss had been less than Colette had feared, a fact Nettie attributed to better shelter decisions made in the fall, which were Silas's decisions, a point Nettie made clearly and without elaboration because clarity was how Nettie operated. Silas took on more of the ranch's operational thinking, not in any formal way. He did not want a title or a ledger with his name on it, but in the practical way of someone who had learned what mattered and was applying what he knew. He corresponded with Douglas Haverford about a water access agreement that put two smaller ranching families on more stable footing. He worked with Garrison to ensure the Ashford claim documentation was complete and current. He continued the kitchen garden and expanded it, and the ranch hands ate better in the summer of 1877 than they had in any previous year. Colette sat on the porch one evening in the Montana summer and looked at the territory spreading out in front of her and understood things she had not had the frame of reference to understand before. She had spent 10 years building something out here. Land and cattle and reputation and the machinery of a successful enterprise. She had done it well. She had measured her life against other people's measures and found herself winning. She sat on the porch of her grand ranch house in the summer evening and understood, with the clarity that comes at the end of a long confusion, that she had built everything a person was supposed to build and had somehow in all of it forgotten to account for this. The particular weight and warmth of a house that sounded like somewhere somebody lived. From the kitchen she could hear Silas singing, not loudly, not for anyone, just under his breath, the way people do when they think no one is listening. Old songs, frontier songs, the kind that had been written by people who understood what it meant to be a long way from wherever they had started. And the house held the sound and held her. And she understood finally that the richest thing she had ever done was nothing she had built. It was opening a door and letting him in.